Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's free weekly e-newsletter, Unleashing Your Remarkable Potential, which is full of articles and resources to help you become a more confident and successful leader. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/newsletter. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, but you probably already knew that. Today, we're talking about an interesting idea with a talented guest. Let me introduce the guest, and the idea will come from our introduction. My guest today is Eric Strafel. He's the author of the new book, The Frontline CEO, and the founder of the consulting firm I7, which helps businesses grow profits and scale innovation with mission-driven purpose. He was the president and CEO of Avail, a global provider of new aviation parts, supply chain management, and other services in the aerospace aftermarket, which was acquired by Boeing. Previously, he held leadership and program management roles at L3 Communications, Honeywell, and Precision Conversions. Eric, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Good to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
I'm so glad that you are here. And so let's just start with sort of where I often start with folks. And that is sort of, how did you end up here? You didn't probably wake up when you were 8 and say, someday I want to write a book called The Frontline CEO. Like, tell us a little bit about the journey that leads you to this place.
Yeah, not at all. I grew up as an introverted young kid that was good at math. And all that told me was I wanted to get into engineering early on. And so I aspired to go contribute to the world, to build things and create things. And as I did that, I worked in engineering and aerospace and started to get into leadership about the year 2000. And as I got into leadership, I saw that as a way to make a bigger impact. If I could rally people around a problem or a solution, that was a way for me to do something more powerful. And I guess I have hard work and service at my core, some of my family values. And so as I got into bigger and bigger leadership roles, it became a bigger way to serve and create an impact. And it became a passion of mine for 20 years to learn about that. And then I'm an avid reader, an avid learner. I always appreciated the thought of writing a book because I had journaled for many years, and I found that journaling helped me learn more about myself. And I thought, you know what? I never consider myself a writer. It would be a heck of a challenge if I were to write a book, a personal challenge for myself. And if I did that, I would learn even more. And so in a way, I saw that as a personal challenge for something I'm really uncomfortable with, in a way to take that next step in exploring leadership and what it means to me. And in the process of writing a book, absolutely brings that out.
Eric, it's interesting. When I wrote one of my early books, someone said, so what leadership book did you learn the most from? And I said, mine. And they looked at me funny. And I said, whoa. You didn't ask what the best one was. You asked which one I learned the most from. And there's no, so I think my early writing experiences, I think maybe match up with yours, that quite honestly, the process of writing adds tremendous value for me as a leader, as it sounds like it does for you as well. So I love that. I love that answer. Thank you. So the book is called The Frontline Leader, long subtitle, Turn Employees into Decision Makers Who Innovate Solutions, Win Customers, and Boost Profits. All of that sounds great. We'd all like to have innovative solutions and more customers and boosting our profits. We'd like that. But I want to start with that idea. What's the big idea? What does it mean to be a frontline CEO? What does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it started out with frontline leadership is engaging where the work gets done. That's where most of the employees work. It's where action is taken in support of customers and getting things done, working processes, and executing your plan. And in larger organizations, oftentimes information and decisions flow up, which is away from where the work is done versus flowing down, which then allows you to be more agile. And so the whole idea of frontline leadership is to flip the traditional org structure on its head and have everything flow the other way. So you're empowering employees, you're flowing information down and empowering frontline leaders to make decisions And then to be a frontline CEO is just to lead by example in doing that. So spending time getting to know teams on the front lines, evaluating and getting insights on decisions that you're going to make, problems to solve, customer insights that you may have, and learning how you can best address them, and then just closing the gap. And I came out of an organization with 6 or 7 layers of leadership, and that's a lot of layers.
A lot of layers.
Yeah, and it slows you down. And in the information age, you can't afford to let that slow you down. And so the natural solution to that is, rather than have things go up and down, kind of compress everything together, push everything to where the work is, and then empower people to make the pivots that they need to make to keep you competitive.
So okay, so that sounds wonderful. So you're saying then that our frontline leaders should act more like CEOs. Is that a fair way to add to that statement?
Yeah. So that also with frontline leaders making decisions, they're also learning and growing and developing. So it becomes an element of leadership development. You have to create space for people to take risks, to make mistakes and learn from them, and you got to be there to have their back. But yeah, absolutely.
So how did you come? I mean, obviously we mentioned already a little bit, and you mentioned it, and I mentioned it in the introduction, a little bit about sort of your business background. How did you come to determine this approach? Like, what led you to the insight that said, hey, this is a better way than the way most organizations do it?
Yeah, I think I had an early insight. I was a Six Sigma black belt in a lean manufacturing continuous improvement leader. And before, that was the position I had right before I led teams. And in doing so, I facilitated process improvement and analysis. And a lot of that is by observation. And so you get close to the work, you understand what the issues and opportunities are, and you realize that the insights that each person doing their job has, in that if you just listen to those insights, you can make significant impact, and not many people do that. And so as I got into leadership, I started to I think because of that background, I started to see leaders that were really engaging and empowering a couple layers deep in their organization, and how effective that was, where they didn't necessarily have to have all the answers. They would encourage and listen to their frontline teams and leaderships on the shop floor, who knew the insights, and just get behind them and invest in those decisions and actions. And I saw really, exponential better performance from organizations that did that. And so I started to model that over time. And then as companies start to move faster, you realize that if you don't do something like that to find a way to move faster, then you're going to get outcompeted, and you're just going to, you're not going to be successful as a company.
So it's interesting. You mentioned 3 sort of benefits in the subtitle of the book, and yet the one that you're talking about a lot so far is speed. And I'm not to downplay anything in the title of the book, but the speed component, I think, is critical, and you're continuing to highlight it, Eric. And we may come back to that. And I really love this idea of gaining speed. But I also love this idea that as we do the stuff you're talking about, Eric, we're creating a way to develop our leaders, not just empower them. I'm going to get to that E word in a second, but to use this as a part of doing the work as a way to develop as a leader. I just really love that. I want to underline that for everybody. So you did use the E word, empowerment. So let's, that's a word that gets tossed around a lot, as you well know. We both know. Everybody knows. What does that actually mean to you?
So empowerment to me is, well, it starts out with an environment where everybody knows where the company is going. Everybody knows the role that they play as part of a team, so they can do their part. And then they're given the freedom to work in the way that is best for them to achieve that result, which is, headed towards the purpose of the company, contributing whatever it is that their role does. And then the signs of that are how they make decisions and solve problems. When they have a decision to make, are they able to make that? Do they collaborate with their peers and just get it done? Or do they end up delegating decisions up? And if they're delegating up, that is a sign of maybe not as empowering as we want to be. And then same thing with how you solve problems. When you solve problems, are they pulling together the experts on the front lines across different teams and trying to figure that out and just going and implementing a solution? Or same thing, are they walking into their manager's office and saying, hey, I've got an issue. What do you want to do about it? Those are two key indicators for me.
So are there any times when we should delegate a decision up?
Yes, if you don't have the resources or it requires investment. And so therefore the company may need to shift priorities. So if essentially what you need to do is figure out, can I do this within my own span of control and within my own budget? And if so, do it. If it requires the company to shift resources and reprioritize across departments, that decision probably should go up so you can reset priorities and figure out what is the best way to allocate your resources and budget. And then the other reason is, of course, if it's a one-way door, we need to go here or there. And if we make that decision and can't go back, the Jeff Bezos, the two-way door, one-way door. I really like that analogy because there are some decisions that are just more impactful that require a broader understanding of the implications for the business.
So I said it's the E word. Everyone knows it. Everyone talks about it. Everyone says we want to do it, although many don't. So why is it that so few leaders actually empower their folks?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. One is it takes time, right? To be directive, really easy to do. We're going to go here, everybody line up, right? That doesn't take a whole lot of time. So it takes time. But what you'll find is if you've ever tried to implement a new strategy, and you're halfway through the year and you're not making the progress that you wanted, that's probably because you didn't take the time up front to get people engaged and involved in whatever that strategy was. If they were, and they were empowered to make the course corrections along the way, everything that first road bump, that first speed bump that came up, they would just work through that because they know what the intent is, back to commander's intent, and they would keep moving. So number one is it's hard. Number two is it's uncomfortable because it requires you to be a little bit more vulnerable as a leader. And it goes against that belief system that leaders have all the answers, which that's a 20th century leadership philosophy to me. And that's before the age of information, when our employees were so informed on just the world around them and customers and communication flows. And so I think if we take the time to engage, inform, empower people to make decisions and spend the time coaching to do that, to get to support, get a little bit uncomfortable being vulnerable in listening and learning ourselves and being willing to admit our own mistakes so that we can learn and recover from them. And then just be more transparent across the board, which also is uncomfortable. I think, those are the reasons why. It's just not how we're comfortable doing things.
Yeah, I love that. So it's hard, it takes time, and it's uncomfortable. And so who wants to do anything that's hard, takes time, and is uncomfortable? Like, that's pretty straightforward. And yet the benefits are so great. And I, your point about why would I want to give up that control? Why would I'm supposed to have all the answers? And so sometimes because we think we're supposed to, we end up acting as though we do because we think that's what's expected of us, right? So if we go back to your earlier comment about empowerment as being about clear role, clear direction, and then the freedom to move, which is the piece that is missing most often? Or in other words, I'm a leader and I'm like, I'm in, Eric, you've convinced me, right? You've finally gotten me over the hump. Where's the place I probably got to do the most work for my folks?
Yeah, to me, that's purpose. But there's a lot behind that, right? So we used to talk about vision statements, and vision gives you a location. It doesn't give you the why behind that. And people need to know the why behind every decision. And so I like purpose statements rather than vision statements these days, because it gives more context in terms of why the company is in business, what problem they're solving for customers, and then it should feed into every decision made. So whatever investments you're making as a company, whatever decisions that you make as a leadership team, if you communicate the why behind that, that gives people the context to effectively make decisions at all levels of the organization. And so to me, it starts with purpose. It can't just be, we're going to grow by 20%, or, hey, we're going to launch 3 new products at the end of the year. Why are you going to do that? Are you trying to create more value for customers? And the more you communicate the why, the more the rest of the organization can rally behind that decision and make all those course corrections along the way. And so it's a constantly talking about why actions, decisions, and investments are made.
One of the things I was struck by early in the book that you talk about is that my words now, not yours, because I don't think you use these exact words, but you basically became an undercover boss without going undercover. Many of us have heard of the television show, watched the TV show and reruns. We've even had a past person that was on the show as a guest on this podcast. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. But so why is that so important that we really take the time to understand as a higher level leader, to really understand what's going on at the front line?
So to really understand the effect of the decisions that you make, you have to spend time with the workers who ultimately are the ones that have to change something that they're doing. If you're making a decision or making an investment, the people on the front lines have to do something differently for that to actually come to life, right? And so for me, a good example is we spend a lot of time optimizing logistics operations. And we made a decision that we're going to invest in some new technology on our receiving line so we could receive more parts. And lo and behold, our cycle time to receive parts went way down, cut by days. Talking to employees on the front lines, they said, yeah, that's great. Now we're calling up trucks and they're waiting in the yard before they come until we're ready for them. So all we did is push that backlog to the yard, which is full of trucks and material coming in, right? And that wasn't intentional. It was just the nature of what happened. We focused on this. We wanted to make sure to get things through. And I wanted to drive efficiency on the front line. And, that was, 12 years ago. And that was one of the early signs of, oh my gosh, I need to better understand what's going on here. And everybody there knew what the deal was. And they said, yeah, if you just call the trucking company and we get better at yard management in the flow of material coming in the door, that's what will really solve the problem that we're trying to solve, which is get work in process out of the pipeline, which costs us money.
And I'm not picking on you now, but if we'd have done that better on the front end, we'd have known that from the start, right?
Exactly.
And so, I leaned my head down to write as you were talking is unintended consequences. And our world is too complex for there never to be them. But I love if I were to say to someone, give me one reason why you need to better understand what's going on in the front line, is so we could eliminate or reduce the number of unintended consequences. Because we've all been on the front line at some point, or we've heard people that we know who are, in a frontline role, or even in the middle of an organization say, well, they just don't understand how that change impacts us, right? And so if we spend more time in that way, I think it makes for better results. And to your point, if we're pushing decisions closer to that point, there's fewer unintended consequences.
Right. Yep. If I just had started with, hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish and this is why, what's the best solution to that? Right. Then and just rally everybody, they would have come up with a better solution than I did. Right. And they would have filled in the gaps on the unintended consequences and the miscommunication.
And I can say that as a leader, sometimes, and I think Eric, I think I'm pretty good at this. And yet there are times when I feel like, well, I have information that plays into it. And that's probably true. But then the question that I always ask myself and I'm convicted by is, well, why aren't you sharing that information? Or if people need that information, share that with them, because then they will still come to great conclusions. So give them what they need. It gets to this idea, although you talk about it in a slightly different way, of radical transparency. And I want to tie that idea in as we're talking about the purpose and the why. what do you mean by that? And what does that actually look like in an organization?
Yeah, radical transparency is a clear line of sight up and down the organization for how the business is performing, what the priorities are, and what everybody's role is. In an example of that in action, I sat down with my communications leader early on when we had an accelerated growth plan and we needed to move fast and we had a lot of competition around us. So I sat down with my communications leader, Victor, and we talked about how can we empower every frontline leader to make the same decision that we would, given the information that we had. We had 200 leaders all over the world. And what we came to is, well, we need to do a monthly business update with every manager on the phone where we're constantly communicating how we're doing as a company, customer insights, what our priorities are, and give them all the information and context so that they can effectively make decisions that consistently the same way that we would in any of their roles. And then, so we did that for a few months and things seemed to get better. And then we said, how can we do even better? And the answer was, have those leaders talk to each other about how they're then absorbing that information, what the gaps are, right, and bridge the gaps. And then we would bring a frontline manager on the phone with us, and I'd give an update, and then they would talk about, okay, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I heard last month, this is what I'm doing about it, and this is what my peers think we need to do, right? And so just constantly refining and closing that gap. And part of that, I want to hit on financials because that's so important and it's maybe the most uncomfortable thing to share. But I do think it's important that employees know the margin you're making. And if you're a public company, sometimes you have to be a little bit restrictive on what you disclose. But whether that be gross margin or net profit, what's the money that you're making? More importantly, how are you reinvesting that money? And then go through the line item investments. If you're going to invest in a new product, a new piece of machine, a new facility, for each line item investment, explaining why and what the expected outcome of that is. That's radical transparency. It's not necessarily going through the entire P&L, but your strategy is how you allocate time and money. And so if you're going to be transparent, you need to go through by line item, how you're allocating money to reinvest in your people and your business, what the expected outcome is, so everybody can really behind that has that context to make sure that those investments pay off. The return on investment that we don't get today, I think, is often because we didn't engage enough people in understanding what the outcome was expected when we made that investment so that they could help ensure that that comes to fruition.
And ultimately, we can't get the level of and the type of empowerment that you're talking about unless people have that information, because then and so there's the vicious cycle, everybody. If I don't give them all of that, then they make decisions that's not the decision I wanted them to make. Well, how could they didn't have all the information, right? So It's so important that we put that, and that's why I wanted you to sort of put a bow on that all the way around. Now, before we go, I've got you here, and you bring a unique perspective, not only from your background, but the work that you're doing now as a consultant. There's actually one more with the CEO hat on that I want you to talk about briefly. It's one of the last chapters in the book. It's obviously something that matters a lot to me as well in the work that we do. Talk to us about what it means to create a learning organization. That's a phrase that Peter Senge had us talking about, in the 90s. And yet, I think you talk about it in very valid and useful ways here. So talk a little bit about what you mean here.
Yeah, I think there's three real things that you have to do. And one is lead by example. And so if you're asking everybody to keep learning about how we can get better as a company, you have to do the same thing as a leader. And a lot of times that learning comes from your own team. And so it's a little bit of back to being vulnerable and being willing to learn and lead by example yourself, and then communicating what you're learning and kind of being transparent about that. The second is just encouraging and providing resources for professional development and doing so in a way that allows people to pursue their passions, whatever career path they want. I think one of the reasons that we're struggling keeping people engaged these days is they just don't see opportunity anymore, and or that opportunity doesn't align with something that interests them. So I think we've got to be more flexible in providing resources that align with interests that may not be directly related to that person's job today, but it's a way that they can better contribute to the company in the future. And then finally, one of the tactics, bring the outside in. And so bring customers in, bring new technology in, cross-industry benchmarks. We've got to bring the outside into our company, whether that be in meetings, in demos, or sending employees to trade shows, whatever that is, going to see a day in the life of a customer. We've got to bring the outside in to keep our perspectives fresh as a company. And if you do all of those things, it allows you to move faster by applying all the trends and technology and advances that are out there to meet the changing needs of your customer. Because if you feel like you don't need to change, I can guarantee your customers are changing and the world around them is changing and your competitors are changing. And so you're going to get left behind. And the way to change is to learn and create a learning organization that allows you to then apply that learning into new innovation and keep moving with speed.
So you mentioned it briefly, as you said. Here's why I think maybe some of the challenges we're having now with finding and maintaining, keeping the talent that we want. I guess my question to you would be, what are your lessons as we look to the future? Now, you and I are having this conversation sometime before this show will go out, and then we don't know when anyone will listen to this show or watch this show. But given that caveat, I'm curious what your thoughts are about what are the lessons for us as leaders as we look to the future of work.
Yeah, for what I think has happened is people have had a chance to reflect on what they really want to do, right? How do they want to contribute? How do they want to live their life? And that includes me. And so I want to work somewhere and do something that is purposeful, that is meaningful, that has personal meaning, where I can contribute something that I've got, something that I uniquely have to contribute. And if companies help employees find purpose and find contribution and find meaning and pursue that in a way that acknowledges who they are and what their skills and strengths are and create that path forward, I think we're going to have a much better time keeping and engaging employees in the future. And it looks different than it did before. It requires a lot more flexibility. It requires getting to know your people, being flexible around their life priorities, and allowing, whether that be a hobby or family or whatever it is that's important to your people, giving people flexibility to pursue that, which is more maybe personal development than professional development. You got to do both these days. And the work-life balance is hard. Everything's, kind of bleeding together. I find myself working at all hours. But if it's something that I find purposeful, it doesn't feel like work so much anymore. It doesn't drain me, right? And I don't have the 60-minute transitions between work and how challenging that was, and then being able to unwind and spend time with family. I can go seamlessly from one to the other because I'm being myself in all scenarios.
Gotcha. So what didn't we talk about that you thought we would or wished we would have, or what else do you want to say? What else do you need us to hear before we sort of round into the final turn of our conversation, Eric?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I found over the last few years, and even in writing the book, is how important it is just to be yourself. And that was a struggle for me. I'm not comfortable opening up in sharing emotions and things like that. But by being yourself and being authentic, communicating your values. I talk a lot about what's important to me at work. I talk a lot about why I make decisions. I talk a lot about my beliefs and where that came from. I also talk about what I'm learning. And by me doing that, it opens up the door for other people to do that. And where we talk about vulnerability and authenticity and all the importance of doing that with our teams, it's often, sometimes the hardest for top leaders, especially if I came up in an environment where that wasn't really encouraged.
Right.
And so I've been trained to not do any of that. And so that was a hard pivot for me. But the benefits of just being yourself are, resonate through the organization because people can see that. And as soon as people can see that, they'll come to you and say, "Hey, Eric, did you think about this? Because there's a better way to do that," right? In a way that they wouldn't have before if I didn't open up. And that unlocks huge potential in any organization.
That's beautiful. That, friends, is good enough reason to have been here. And I guess I should have gotten that out of you sooner, Eric. So let's, you talked a little bit a minute ago about work-life balance and that sort of thing. So now I'm going to ask you that question. What do you do, Eric, for fun?
I spend a lot of time with kids sports, and then I do martial arts. I do mostly Muay Thai these days. And the reason is I like the discipline and the mastery. I like to always be honing a skill, right? And so I've been doing martial arts in some form or fashion for about 15 years. And so that's my getaway to engage.
All right. And now the only question I told you I was going to ask you, and that is, what are you reading these days, Eric?
Yeah, I read multiple books at a time, which is helpful. But one is Atomic Habits, James Clear. And the reason is I talk a lot about building the routines in your business that help you, with this type of leadership, but also the routines in life and the habits that you build, and whether those are positively reinforcing or not are really important. And I love how Atomic Habits talks about that. And then Measure What Matters by John Doerr is another one, because I'm doing work with a lot of companies, and as we're putting up scoreboards so people know where they stand, making sure that you know what's important is really critical. And so kind of the routines combined with a scoreboard that matters is impactful. And so I had read that before. I'm going back and reading that again, but those are the two books on my shelf right now.
Perfect. Those are good choices for all of us. So now the question you've been wanting me to ask. So Eric, where can people learn more about you and this book, and where do you want to point people to get connected with you, et cetera?
Yeah, so you can find the book on Amazon. Appreciate anybody checking that out, and let me know what you think. You can find us at summit.com, SUMMI7.com, and learn more about our company and what we're trying to do to support what we call the mighty middle businesses to rebound and create jobs and promote equality and economic development. And then you can follow us. You can look me up on LinkedIn and connect, and happy to engage.
Eric Strafel. Sorry. Eric, thank you for that. Now I've got a question for all of you who are watching, or most of you listening. You can watch, by the way. But if you are listening, here's the question that I ask every single episode. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of this? Because listening alone has limited value. Let's just be honest. So maybe the question is, what are you going to do around empowering your folks? Maybe the question is thinking about purpose more than just vision. Maybe where you're going to focus is, how will you let go enough? How will you spend the time that it takes to empower your folks? You agree with the idea, but now you're going to take action to do it. I don't know what that would be for you, but maybe for you, it's choosing to be a little bit more vulnerable. Whatever that might be, the challenge for you is to take action on this, because until you take action, what's really the point, everybody? So my question, that's my last question for you. Eric, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure, such a pleasure to have you with us today. Glad to have had you here.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
So everybody, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with others. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, we'd love a rating or your comments. And but we'd also just love for you to come back, because we're here every week, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.